welcome to the next talk from Felipe and Markus. I'm not Felipe, I'm Roger. Obviously, Felipe was unable to join here on site, and we can't do the setup of having a remote and a local speaker, so I was jumping in here. Felipe and me, we met about a year ago, and he's from the IT infrastructure team responsible for the clients that are used by all the employees. As we've seen also during the last presentations, we have some Linux top cracks having a more advanced requirements, but there the goal is really to have a Linux for everyone. And the way of working, I was working for over 15 years within R&D at Building Technologies, is a little bit different maybe if you in contrast to the classical IT, let's say, phrase it like this. You have other things that are going on in a typical development environment and so on. And so I started to collaborate with the people there from the IT team responsible for clients. And of course also to bring in that open source way of working into the company in other areas, not only within the product development teams or the coding platform and so on. And then somewhere, also about a year ago, we had the chance to get some more team members at the code.siemens.com crew. And we had an interview with Markus. And one of the questions there was, what operating system do you want to have on your machine? And the answer was Linux. And of course, from my perspective, we should really give all the people the choice of the operating systems if they're able to handle it. Of course, if you've never seen a command line, it might not be the right choice, but that's why we're here, and we're contributing. And of course, as soon as I recognized, I'm in touch with the IT colleagues working on this, having a new team member starting in October, I have to contribute and make it nice. And so we started the journey. And of course, it's a bit special, let's say, corporate environment, or not pure developer-only environment. You have closed source software you have to handle. There's some stuff you must somehow install. You can't avoid things, all the things. You don't have all those pieces. You have open source software, of course, tons of. And traditional IT services, in many cases, we still have, of course, those ticket systems, and then you have to wait and so on. And the developers, they want to have issue trackers, merge requests, they want to see the code and so on. And this was, of course, one of the things to bring in here also into the IT organization. We have also now, of course, a fancy logo from André Fischbach. Thanks again. He was the designer also for the Code Siemens.com logo, and doing nice stuff for us. So, why do we need a Linux client, and what are the main challenges we were facing? And with more and more requirements starting, of course, also coming from the security aspects, like, is your disk encrypted? Do you have a virus scanner or whatever thing in place? We need more and more. We need to check the compliance state of devices, so to being able to access resources on the local network and so on. And of course, a lot of people today, we need security exceptions to run special environment and so on. And you can imagine from the previous presentation we've seen, they really need exceptions and special environments. That's where the top experts are developing the latest features of real-time or whatever for our products and solutions. That's probably not something where IT can deliver all the things, of course. And there we need a close collaboration, and the goal is really to have as less exception processes and so on there, so that really all the people can more or less start and not exchanging tweaks and hacks together on the internal social networks and so on how to become able to work. At the end, we don't want to hack the things, we want to do our work. That's why we're here. And as we've learned, you probably all know, but not all within the company are aware of that we have thousands of products and solutions based on Linux in the market. Like 20 years, for 20 years working with those XenMI real-time things, it's something we really have all over and across the company, and free choice for the developers. That's super important. Otherwise, if you're not able to provide Mac, Linux, or Windows to the people, some talents might say, "Have a nice day. I'm gonna work like this with that kind of machine. Otherwise, look for somebody else." And of course, we dream a lot about to do it better, no exceptions, to have really a smooth user experience. Of course, it might take a very, very long time, as we still have a bunch of proprietary software we have to use. We don't have source code. Even we will be able to fix it. We have the people within the company to fix all the things, I know. But if you don't have the source code, you can't. And of course, making Linux a first-class citizen at Siemens, so that also cloud developers or many other people just not doing the hardcore Linux kernel stuff and so on can just use Linux, get connected to the things, having their mail clients and stuff, and doing the Docker run, Docker pull, or whatever.
Just to say it very clear, Windows developers are also no first-class citizens.
I know. The colleague just said that also Windows developers are not first-class citizens in some regards, and I had to say, yes, we really have some problems there. Where we're working on together with different colleagues to create kind of a bundled exception process also for developer needs. Because nowadays, I agree, it's not that easy, and at the end, the people that are building the products we get the money out from must work. So yeah, what a challenge. Once again, we have some security tools and so on. Some of them do only support some distributions. Of course, if you don't have the source code, you can't compile it to make it run in other environments, etc., etc. We use PKI cards, for example, and for the smart cards, for mails and encryption stuff, and so on. Company network, that's of course other topic where we need special network rules and so on. We're using the Microsoft Azure Active Directory for authentication purposes and so on, and yeah, the people, that's maybe one specialty within the Linux area. The people have their favorite console, they have their favorite browser. We know already the favorite browser thingy, but they have their favorite desktop environment, they have their favorite Linux distribution, they have there's so many different flavors, and the diversity, it's incredible. You see in the Linux area, and of course you can't support all the things. So we started with Ubuntu and having now Debian as well. Markus will get more into many of the details. The other thing, of course, we need community contributions, and we must contribute certain things to the open source projects to have a sustainable client. Otherwise, if you end up with tons of local patches and fixes here and there, after a few years, you have no chance to maintain the software behind the scenes to manage a client. Another important topic, onboarding without internet access. So remote work scenarios was a must-have. Now we're already.
Yeah. So as Roger said, there are some challenges, and in particular the last challenge where we have all these different use cases, all the different requirements. There, it's really important to work with the community, and this is also one of the reasons why Felipe and Roger, when this project was started, really pushed also for this open approach to developing this client. And I will go through a few points what this actually means in our case. So just one comment here, this is not an open source project, this is an inner source project, so it's not on GitHub, but it's on code Siemens.com. It's visible for everybody within Siemens, but not publicly. But the processes, the approaches, all of these are similar to an open source project, and I will talk about this with a few examples. So the first thing is that the development and the planning and all the community interactions, they happen openly on code.siemens.com. So this is really an IT service that is not developed somewhere in a closed environment where people work on something and then hand it over at some point to the employees, but it's from the very beginning, this was all of this was done openly on code Siemens.com. So this means we have milestones where we have monthly and long-term planning that everybody can look at. Everything that we want to, all features that we want to implement, all fixes that are required are tracked in issues. And whenever there's decisions to be made, everybody can see the discussion and also weigh in on these decisions. Of course, yeah. And it also means that everything that is done through mLinux, so every configuration that we push to the clients, everything that is going to be installed on the clients, all this is visible also in our code Siemens.com repository, so everybody can look at this is going to be installed, these tools are going to run, and everybody can see what is happening. And not only do we have the planning and the code on code Siemens.com, we also have all the community interactions on code Siemens.com. That means we do not have a separate IT help desk. There's no MyIT process for interacting with mLinux, ordering an mLinux, and so on. So everything is done on code Siemens.com. This means whenever there's some issue, you experience a problem, you can just open an issue on our project and you will directly interact with the team members for mLinux who know or can debug the problem, can fix the problem, and there's no intermediate layer in this case. Also, all our documentation is part of the same project and is built with mkdocs that we have in many areas within Siemens, and this is automatically built and then served via the GitLab Pages feature, and there we provide instructions how to set up the mLinux, how you some potential issues that we are still aware of, troubleshooting, FAQ, and so on. So we try to make this as accessible as possible. We want to provide this service, of course, for developers, but in principle for everybody who wants to use Linux within Siemens. And of course, this also has a lot of benefits for us as team members for mLinux. As you've heard already a few times and you've seen in Jan and Florian's presentation, we have really hardcore Linux experts within the company. And building such a system somewhere without talking to these experts, you would of course lose all this expertise. So in many cases we were made aware of tools that exist that we, for example, didn't know of, that we could use, guidance to how to do certain things, and really this open way of working gives us these benefits also from the community. There are now many Linux users who have already contributed some documentation, some bug fixes. Of course, they also report existing issues. And in a way, you have all the benefits of an open source software project also in this case. So all the benefits from having this community that helps you build and improve the service. The second thing, we're doing this all on CodeSiemens.com, so our GitLab instance. So we also can use the GitOps workflow. So that means everything, all the code that we have is part of the repository, and all changes require merge requests, which means that at least one second person has looked at it. We have automatic linting and testing, so to make sure that whenever something is changed, we're pretty sure that we don't break anything with that. And also for larger changes, larger bug fixes or feature additions, we create a temporary Puppet environment so that we can really run this also on our machines. So as you see here, I have my MLinux device in front of me. So whenever we have major changes, we first test it on the MLinux team members. Roger already said I wanted to have a Linux machine, and actually the two users, 1 and 2, Roger and myself, we're standing here now. So we are using this system every day. I only have this MLinux machine. I don't even have a second one. And I've been using this since October, actually. The second thing is then, as soon as we have something merged to the production branch, this is automatically deployed to the Puppet environment and is then directly available to all the clients. And a second thing which we also automatize is that whenever we have a new registration, then this user is validated. We have to do certain checks that they're not located in some embargo countries and so on. This is done automatically, and they're then added to the necessary resource groups to be able to use MLinux. And also that, of course, gives us a lot of benefits. All the changes that are happening are transparent. Everybody can see the merge requests, the discussions at the merge requests, can comment if something is, if they think this is not good. And of course, this GitOps workflow allows us to be agile in one way, so we can directly deploy new features, but still be reasonably certain that nothing breaks because of the automated tests and so on. So again, this is pretty similar to an open source software project, but just now for an IT service. Roger said also there's one challenge that unfortunately, like many large corporations, we use a lot of proprietary software, but whenever possible, we try to go for open source tools for open standards. So the tool that we chose for managing all the devices is Puppet. This is a device management tool that allows us to tell the clients certain configurations and things that they have to install, and it also allows us to do certain checks for compliance reasons. For example, is the hard drive encrypted? This is a security requirement, and we can check that just as one example. Puppet is an open source software. There's a Puppet Enterprise, but this is just ease of use features that help with convenience, but it's not a crucial part. So the main part that we're using from Puppet is the open source part. And what we install on the client unless it's really relevant, for example, collaboration tools based on Microsoft. We always try to use open source tools that exist already. So, for example, there's very good smart card support with the OpenSC tool. We can use also our smart cards for signing emails, encrypting emails, and receiving signed and encrypted emails in Evolution, for example. This we automatically configure for the users. We manage all the Siemens specific certificates with the P11 kit. That was also one thing that was suggested by one of the Linux experts within the company. And we use open source projects like DevSec.io for OS hardening and so on. And again, of course, this has a lot of benefits for us. Being open source software, this can be reused not just for mLinux, this can also potentially be reused in other contexts. Of course, debugging is much easier if you have access to good documentation and source code. And also a crucial part is that when we discover missing features or we discover bugs, then we don't have to wait for some vendor to fix those, but we can just fix them ourselves, time permitting, of course. Yeah, and in many cases, actually, the community provides so good documentation and resources that this is much nicer to work with. And in this area of using open source tools, we are adopting a similar strategy that the Code Siemens.com team also uses with GitLab. So we have an upstream first approach whenever possible. So we do not create forks or local patches whenever possible. Instead, we report bugs upstream. In some cases, we fix them ourselves or contribute new features that we require. And this is, of course, something like giving back to the community that offers all these tools that we use for free. So it's just, well, common courtesy to give something back. And in many cases, we may have a use case that is not that is not supported yet, but other people might have the same use case. So it's always good then to contribute this back to the upstream projects. But of course, again here, even though this is the main reason, this also has benefits for us. Also similar to GitLab, if we can just take the upstream code, the upstream containers, whatever, then this is much easier to maintain. We don't have to apply our patches and update our patches all the time. We can just take the upstream project directly and use it. And also a secondary thing is that if we upstream our changes, then the maintainer of the upstream project can also improve the code that we contribute and give feedback, and so all this gets even better. Okay, and now after presenting these principles, I guess you're all familiar with this kind of workflow and approach, because that's how open source works. I want to present one example that shows a few of these principles that I just talked about, namely certificate lifecycle management. As Roger mentioned, there's the challenge that we require device certificates so that the clients have access to the company Wi-Fi or Ethernet network. And these certificates, they of course need to be renewed regularly, they need to be issued, and all of that needs to happen in a secure manner. And of course, ideally, this should happen automatically and not with a manual workflow with emails and so on and so forth. So what we want is we want to have a secure system to manage these device certificates based on open standards if possible. And the problem here is that, let's say we have here on the left our mLinux client. On the right, we have some different backends that create certificates that use different and sometimes proprietary protocols. And well, this does not really fit. So, for example, so first of all, we want to use open standards if possible. And whenever something in the backend would change, we also would have to adapt the clients accordingly. So the solution that we then came up with is that we use an open standard, an open protocol called ACME, and we place an ACME proxy server between the mLinux device and these different backends. And this ACME proxy serves an ACME facade, so it speaks ACME with the client, this protocol, and it is able to interact with the backend servers who then can issue the certificates. All right, so a quick question to the audience. Who of you knows about ACME? Okay, maybe around a third. Who has already used this? Okay, the same people. Good. All right, so ACME is an open standard for automatically managing X509 certificates. So we're not talking about this ACME corporation that you may know from the Roadrunner movies, although the name may have been inspired by this. Instead, what ACME actually stands for is Automatic Certificate Management Environment. And this is a standard that was developed a few years ago by the Internet Security Research Group to be able to automatically provide certificates for web servers in their free service Let's Encrypt. So the idea there is let's use HTTPS wherever possible. And to do that, every web server needs to have a certificate. And all the processes that existed before were expensive, sometimes manual and tedious. So what they came up with is this automatic certificate management environment so that everybody can very easily obtain these certificates. And this was standardized around 3 years ago by IETF. And essentially, yeah, it allows any web server to obtain a certificate for its domain name in an automatic fashion. And I'll briefly show how this works on a high level. So essentially, we have here the client is the web server, the server is the ACME server. So there's no human client. It's the web server is the client, and the client wants to it's serving a website at some domain, and it needs a certificate for that domain. So initially, this client sends a request to the ACME server for onboarding. So it creates an account key pair and then registers with the ACME server, and it asks. It mentions the domain it wants to have certificates for. And now the question is, well, the ACME server at some point should present a certificate, but of course only if the client actually owns that domain. So obviously it shouldn't provide a certificate just to anyone, but only to the legitimate owner of a domain. So the server then issues a so-called challenge. There's two main ways to do that. The one is a DNS challenge, the other one is an HTTP challenge, and essentially challenges the client to serve some particular random value via DNS or HTTPS. Then the client, if the client, so the web server, is the legitimate owner of the domain, it would have access to the name server. It would be able to enter a new domain, DNS record, or serve at this domain a particular value at some particular point. So the web server then gets this challenge from the ACME server and serves this either as a TXT DNS record or serves this at some particular location via HTTP. And the ACME server then can do this DNS resolution or look at the HTTP at the specific URL and check, yes, is the client able to fulfill this challenge? And this is really the heart of ACME, essentially. This is the process to verify that the client actually controls the domain that it wants a certificate for. And then after this is done, the client can actually create its key pair for the actual website, for example, and then send a certificate signing request, CSR, to the Acme server. The Acme server checks, is this the same domain that I have just verified? If yes, it will provide the certificate. And all of this is automatic, so there's automatic tools for that. Some web servers do this automatically, and this is a really simple process, and there's not really a reason anymore to not have HTTPS because it's so simple, unless there's very good reasons for not doing it. So this was designed for web certificates to be used with TLS, but we can also use this to get these device certificates that we are talking about. So as I said, we have this Acme proxy. This acts as an Acme server towards the client, and then in the backend somehow communicates with these other services to obtain the certificates. There are three challenges essentially. The first one is that we need to be able to fulfill this DNS challenge. So in our case, we use the DNS challenge. So the Acme server will give a challenge to the mLinux client in this case, and will then later look up in the DNS, is this challenge fulfilled or not? So in some way, we need to be able to place this TXT record in the DNS. But this needs to happen in a secure way. We cannot just give each mLinux client the authority to create these records. This would, of course, be kind of defeat the whole purpose. So this needs to happen in a secure way. The second problem is that this Acme proxy server that we use, Acme to Certifier, this is an open source project. At the point where we started looking into it, didn't support all the protocols that are used by our backends. So, for example, we use in the AD0, we have this RPC DCOM Microsoft protocol that was at that point not supported by the system. And the last challenge is that to be able to actually authenticate in the network, Radius requires a device object in the Active Directory. So these are the challenges that we set out with. And luckily, the first one is relatively simple to solve because we already have a secure channel between the Puppet master and the mLinux device. This is created during the enrollment of the device, so this is a secure channel. So the mLinux device can tell to the Puppet master, I have received this challenge. The master knows this comes from a valid mLinux device and can then create the DNS record. For this RPC DCOM communication, we have then implemented this as a CA handler for this Acme proxy, and also for the Active Directory challenge, we added a feature that we can have certain hooks at the beginning or end of this certificate issuance process. So whenever the issuance is successful, we can call such a hook that then adds the device as in the Active Directory. And there again, the second and third part, we didn't just implement for us and then use it ourselves, but we contributed this directly to the project, to the open source project. All right, now I'm already slowly coming to an end. What have we learned while doing this IT service as in an open source way? Well, we saw there's a lot of benefits. So the feedback and the insights from the community that are really valuable for building this service. Many of the developers actually really appreciate this very close communication channels with the maintainers. And we saw different examples how this workflow improves scalability, maintainability, stability, transparency, and so on. So there's really a lot of benefits from our point of view of doing an IT service in that way. Of course, this doesn't solve everything. Just being transparent and open doesn't mean that all the requirements can be fulfilled at the same time. So in many cases, there's direct contradictions of security requirements on the one side and some use cases on the other side. And even if they're not directly conflicting with each other, there's still sometimes resource limitations that require prioritizing certain features. And of course, I mean, one of the challenges, all the proprietary software, there's always challenges with that. We try to handle this as much as possible for the MLinux users, but this will remain challenging despite this process. But in the end, we think that all the benefits of doing this in that open way definitely are more important. And at the moment, this is now in production use since the end of April. We have about 150 users. A few more are joining every day. This is now available for everybody within this Siemens company. We support currently Ubuntu and Debian, but we have a few more distributions on the roadmap. And we have around a handful of people working on this, some like Roger and myself part-time. And we have a lot of plans, so all the principles that I told you about were not 100% there in all cases. So for the whole backend infrastructure, not everything is done as infrastructure as code. So this is one important point where we are currently improving. We want to increase the flexibility for the users so that they have more choices of distributions, of tools, what they want to have installed, and so on. Further strengthening the cooperation with the Linux community within the company, and some of the things that we have built to contribute those also upstream. And here's also a comment, similar advertisement as Jan already made, or Florian. There's also an open position in this area, so this is not the same, like we're not working on the Linux kernel. We're using Linux and Linux-related tools to build this client, so it's a slightly different job. But Linux experts, you're more than welcome to apply and join our team. And with that, I want to mention again Felipe Herrera Martinez. He's really the core person behind MLinux. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here, but he's the main architect. He has really contributed, well, he's the core person here, and just compliments to him. And for those, for Siemens employees, there's also our website and our GitLab repository noted here. With that, I think we're done, and we're happy to have questions.
We have a question from the audience.
So if none of the Linux guys is asking a question, me as a Windows guy. So I hear presentations like this, I would say almost like 2016. So do we have to redo this Linux development machine effort every year?
That's a question. At the moment, I don't know. I would say till now, the only option is the self-managed clients that are available of IT. So it's so-called user-managed digital workplace we have, and this is available. And the goal here is not to replace that. The goal here is to have a simple solution for all the people that is compliant with all the security requirements. And yeah.
Okay. Second question, unless someone else has one. So I know most of the people here in the room are Linux guys, so I'm not. I'm wondering whether there's any understanding in our IT department that developers have different needs, because I can't see this.
Yeah, that's exactly. I'm within IT, and I can tell you, I'm doing my best, and also our team, we all together are doing our best to really change that. So we have also more people from IT joining here. How to really collaborate in such an open way. And as we all know here, I would say we all know that we have to collaborate in such an open way on Linux and developer systems and so on. And that's of course also one of the main reasons to really bring in more of that collaborative mindset, that you really need that way of working from. I fully believe into that we must work like this for such a client, because otherwise we will never be able to really combine, let's say, the IT experts that did things maybe in a different way as other people are doing the products, but really bring those people together and learn from each other. It's of course sometimes difficult to speak somehow different language, but it was an amazing journey. And also this once again, thank you, Felipe.
Any questions from the chat, Diego? Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, Felipe actually is in the chat. You know, he's answering the questions, but of course, you know, the chat won't, let's say, leave after this. You know, so probably I just mentioned some of this, and maybe you want to add something. So thank you, Felipe, again. If you hear us from where you are, like for instance, there's a couple of questions asking about like support for further distributions. You know, like Fedora and Arch and so. Like, what is? I mean, I know you have milestones, but you know, what is the current plan somehow?
Yes, so we have this planned for, I think, I think currently we have this planned for June or July, adding additional distributions. So this is certainly something that we want to do in the future. For us, so far, the main goal was to have one good, stable distribution that is offered, and then from that continue with new ones.
Maybe extending on that, because there's a question, you know, asking, is it possible to contribute, you know, helping to support the different distros, or what areas would you be happy to have helping hands? I mean, which parts?
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. This would be, of course, always a long list. I mean, we value everything from small additions to the documentation, to mentioning issues, helping debug bugs, and also doing research how to implement the new features, until, of course, really contributing major new features and so on. So we're always happy to have new contributors. So just find us on the issue track, I would say.
Maybe a last one is, I mean, I think you answered this already, but like, what is the current status of reading and writing encrypted emails? I think this works.
This is
right
works. I have to use it sometimes, and this was also an interesting story. We interacted there with Evolution, EWS maintainer. Might be not the best thing to use with that backend, but that's what we were using, and then we debugged a lot of things, and then the maintainer made a fix there. We tested, verified different variants of the patch, and made then also contributions to the Evolution EWS package within Ubuntu and Debian, so to get that fixed. And so we deleted it already, that package, from our package feed as it's upstream.
Okay, so I mean, there's a lot of more discussions here, so I would just suggest you to visit the there's a question here.
Ah, there's one here from the audience.
One question here.
Yeah, so currently I'm not an M Linux user yet. I'm a Windows user. But one problem I have with all these managed clients is that you have antivirus software on them. And as a developer who has to compile things, slowing down file system I/O is a really, really huge problem. And that's a reason why often developers use virtual machines without any security stuff in it, just to have reasonable compile speed. How is the situation with M Linux here?
We have a thing there called Microsoft Defender or so. There are different options you can use to tweak it a little bit. Let's say to disable the more paranoid mode, still being compliant, and then of course, just recently we changed the time, for example, for the configuration delivery to the clients, so being to do that not that often. So I also sorry to say that, but I also did disable the thing to being able to work sometimes. And of course, I think the most important thing in some working environment, you might have to disable it for a while to do the things, but having it completely off is also not a good thing, to be honest. And so having then an option, if you do the heavy lifting or compile jobs, to disable it also for a while, that's at least something that will be possible. And also excluding folders and so on, for example. That's of course, as I'm a developer, and Markus as well, we're really taking care on that it is becomes and still stays usable for the developers.